Chapter 4 of The Log of a Cowboy by Andy Adams. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Atascosa. For the next few days we paralleled the coast, except when forced inland by various arms of the Laguna Madre. When about a week out from the Arroyo Colorado, we encountered the salt lagoon, which threw us at least 50 miles in from the coast. Here we had our last view of salt water, and the murmurings of the Gulf were heard no more. Our route now led northward through what were then the two largest ranches in Texas, the Running W and Laurel Leaf, which sent more cattle up the trail bred in their own brand than any other 4 ranches in the Lone Star State. We were nearly a week passing through their ranges, and on reaching Santa Gertruda Ranch, we learned that 3 trail herds of over 3,000 head each had already started in those 2 brands, while 4 more were to follow. So far we had been having splendid luck in securing water for the herd, once a day at least, and often twice and 3 times. Our herd was becoming well trail broken by this time, and for range cattle had quieted down and were docile and easy to handle. Flood's years of experience on the trail made him a believer in the theory that stampedes were generally due to negligence in not having the herd full of grass and water on reaching the bed ground at night. Barring accidents which will happen, his view is the correct one, if care has been used for the first few weeks in properly breaking the herd to the trail. But though hunger and thirst are probably responsible for more stampedes than all other causes combined, it is the unexpected which cannot be guarded against. A stampede is the natural result of fear, and at night or in uncertain light this timidity might be imparted to an entire herd by a flash of lightning or peal of thunder, while the stumbling of a night horse or the scent of some wild animal would in a moment's time, from frightening a few head, so infect a herd as to throw them into the wildest panic. Amongst the thousands of herds like ours which were driven over the trail during its brief existence, none ever made the trip without encountering more or less trouble from runs. Frequently a herd became so spoiled in this manner that it grew into a mania with them, so that they would stampede on the slightest provocation, or no provocation at all. A few days after leaving Santa Gertruda Ranch, we crossed the Nueces River, which we followed up for several days, keeping in touch with it for water for the herd. But the Nueces, after passing Oakville, makes an abrupt turn, doubling back to the southwest, and the Atascosa, one of its tributaries, became our source of water supply. We were beginning to feel a degree of overconfidence in the good behavior of our herd, when one night during the 3rd week out an incident occurred in which they displayed their running qualities to our complete satisfaction. It occurred during our guard. About 2 o'clock in the morning. The night was an unusually dark one, and the atmosphere was very humid. After we had been on guard duty possibly an hour, John Officer and I riding in one direction on opposite sides of the herd, the rebel circling in the opposite. Officer's horse suddenly struck a gopher burrow with his front feet, and in a moment horse and rider were sprawling on the ground. The accident happened but a few rods from the sleeping herd, which instantly came to their feet as one steer, and were off like a flash. I was riding my nigger boy, and as the cattle headed towards me, away from the cause of their fright, I had to use both quirt and rowel to keep clear of the onrush. Fortunately, we had a clear country near the bed ground, and while the terrified cattle pressed me close, my horse kept the lead. In the rumbling which ensued, all sounds were submerged by the general din, and I was only brought to the consciousness that I was not alone by seeing several distinct flashes from 6-shooters on my left, and realizing that I also had a gun, fired several times in the air in reply. I was soon joined by Priest and Officer, the latter having lost no time in regaining his seat in the saddle, and the 3 of us held together some little distance, for it would have been useless to attempt to check or turn this onslaught of cattle in their first mad rush. The wagon was camped about 200 yards from the bed ground, and the herd had given ample warning to the boys asleep, so that if we three could hold our position in the lead, help would come to us as soon as the men in the camp could reach their horses. Realizing the wide front of the running cattle, Priest sent Officer to the left and myself to the right, to point in the leaders in order to keep the herd from splitting or scattering, while he remained in the center and led the herd. I soon gained the outside of the leaders, and by dropping back and coming up the line, pointed them in to the best of my ability. I had repeated this a number of times, even quirting some cattle along the outside, or burning a little powder in the face of some obstinate leader, when across the herd and to the rear I saw a succession of flashes like fireflies, which told me the boys were coming to our assistance. Running is not a natural gait with cattle, and if we could only hold them together and prevent splitting up, in time they would tire, while the rear cattle could be depended on to follow the leaders. All we could hope to do was to force them to run straight, and in this respect we were succeeding splendidly, though to a certain extent it was a guess in the dark. When they had run possibly a mile, I noticed a horseman overtake Priest. After they had ridden together a moment, one of them came over to my point, and the next minute our foreman was racing along by my side. In his impatience to check the run, he took me with him, and circling the leaders, we reached the left point, by which time the remainder of the outfit had come up. Now massing our numbers, we fell on the left point, and amid the flash of guns, deflected their course for a few moments. A dozen men, however, can cover but a small space, and we soon realized that we had turned only a few hundred head, for the momentum of the main body bore steadily ahead. Abandoning what few cattle we had turned, which, owing to their running ability, soon resumed their place in the lead, we attempted to turn them to the left. Stretching out our line until there was a man about every 20 feet, we threw our force against the right point and lead, in hope of gradually deviating their course. For a few minutes the attempt promised to be successful, but our cordon was too weak, and the cattle went through between the riders, and we soon found a portion of our forces on either side of the herd, while a few of the boys were riding out the rush in the lead. On finding our forces thus divided, the 5 or 6 of us who remained on the right contented ourselves by pointing in the leaders, for the cattle, so far as we could tell, were running compactly. Our foreman, however, was determined to turn the run, and after a few minutes' time rejoined us on the right, when under his leadership we circled the front of the herd and collected on the left point, when for a third time we repeated the same tactics in our efforts to turn the stampede. But in this, which was our final effort, we were attempting to turn them slowly and on a much larger circle, and with a promise of success. Suddenly in the dark we encountered a mesquite thicket, into which the lead cattle tore with a crashing of brush and a rattle of horns that sent a chill up and down my spine. But there was no time to hesitate, for our horses were in the thicket, and with the herd closing in on us, there was no alternative but to go through it, every man for himself. I gave Nigger a free rein, shutting my eyes and clutching both cantle and pommel to hold my seat. The black responded to the rowel, and tore through the thicket, in places higher than my head, and came out in an open space considerably in the lead of the cattle. The thicket must have been 8 or 10 rods wide, and checked the run to a slight extent, but as they emerged from it, they came out in scattering files and resumed their running. Being alone and not knowing which way to turn, I rode to the right and front, and soon found myself in the lead of quite a string of cattle. Nigger and I were piloting them where they listed, when Joe Stallings, hatless himself and his horse heaving, overtook me, and the two of us gave those lead cattle all the trouble we knew how. But we did not attempt to turn them, for they had caught their wind in forcing the thicket, and were running an easy stroke. Several times we worried the leaders